Elena. I know some of you from, I'm the owner of Merino Physiotherapy. And how many of you were here at the last one of these I did? I see a few hands there. Awesome. Well, I'm really excited to be here. I've gotten to work with a lot of different people from Burn Bootcamp for a variety of things, everything from knees to heels to shoulders to necks. And what they've asked me to come in and talk about today is something that a lot of people get excited about. It's having the perfect core, all right? Let me just start with saying I do not have the perfect core. You're gonna have things that come along in life here and there, and the point isn't to be perfect all the time, but that you're always kind of on the way. You are my hero. Thank you so much.
I get one more for you, because it's the front.
Oh, okay, I'll wait. So, today what we're going to be talking about, how many of you do core work on a regular basis? Lots of hands up, because you're here, right? You're doing all kinds of core work. What we're going to be looking at is what happens if you're not doing it well, what happens if you're, what are the secondary things that can be happening? So if you don't have a good foundation of a good core, there's a lot of other things that can go wrong. The first thing most people will notice is usually going to be either back pain or knee pain. Has anyone in here ever had back or knee pain before? That's a lot of hands. So one of the things that we look at, if you don't have a good foundation, you're not going to be able to build on it very well. And we tend to think of core as being for sit-ups. But in reality, when my foot hits the ground, it's my core that's controlling what my pelvis is doing, and my hips. So when we look at core, most people tend to think six-pack abs. Chris Helmsworth, right? When we think about core, it's not just it's called your rectus abdominis, so six-pack muscles that are at the top and the bottom. We've got to look at all the other things that are involved as well. So if you have, if your core is supposed to stabilize your trunk, kind of think of your trunk. Thank you so much. You're my hero for the day. Let me throw that away.
No, I can't.
So what we look at is your core basically controls what your spine does and your pelvis. So if you think you got a pelvis here, I'm here at the pelvis. It's not a good marker. So if you've got the pelvis, right, and you've got the chunks of the spine, that's a spine, I promise. So if you think about those six-pack muscles, they attach up here at your ribs and down here to that pubic bone in the front. So do y'all know what I mean by the pubic bone? It's that bone that's right here in the front. So your six-pack muscles, your rectus abdominis attaches from your ribs down to here. So what happens when a muscle tightens is it gets shorter. So what's going to happen if you have a muscle attached to the top and the bottom? It's going to compress, right? So a lot of times what we're looking at is we end up, if you don't have a good position of your spine when you're starting to work on your core activities, you're going to compress your spine into the position you're in. So if I'm in this position and I compress, then all I'm doing is I'm going to be jamming down my back. If I'm way in this position and I compress, I'm going to be jamming on my back. So those are two complete opposite directions. And if you think about on your spine, you have this little pad in the middle. Those are called discs. We used to think of them like shock absorbers. In reality, they're like little spacers. But if you squash a disc, how many of you have ever heard of a bulging disc or? Oh, she was making Sorry. How many of you have heard of someone who's had a bulging disc, right? So what happens if you think about, and this is not exactly how this works, but it's just how I want you to think about it. If you think about a disc, kind of like a jelly donut. Jelly on the inside, fibrous outer part, hold it in. If I squish a disc between two blocks, what happens to jelly? It's mushed out. It doesn't squirt out that way. Like it's a pretty stable thing. But you can visualize over time. So those people who do a lot of this, I don't know, anyone who cleans a house or cares for a child, just things to think about. You're going to be putting stress on there. And if the way that you're using your core is to push you like this, you're kind of going into the opposite direction. This is why a lot of times when we're younger and we start doing core work, if you have any back problems, it can actually, have any of you ever had some, like your back got bothered when you're trying to do some core work? Yeah, exactly. So what we've got to look at is for your body, where neutral is and how you're stabilizing neutral, being able to move around it. So just doing the hard stuff for your large core muscles tends to squash and compress, all right? Do you want your spine to do this, or do you want it to have just good control as you do your day-to-day activities, right? So that's what we're gonna be looking at today. Now, there's a few different muscles we do for this. Everyone wants to think about the six-pack muscles and the obliques, but there's a lot more to it. So, how many of you have heard of hip flexors? Right? We tend to think that hip flexors do this, okay? How many times in life, this is what that muscle actually does. Do you think that we have a muscle specifically dedicated to playing hacky sack? No. In reality, what it is when your foot hits the ground, that muscle is moving your trunk over your legs so you can take a step. Now, how many steps do you take each day versus hacky sack kicks? Probably a lot more steps, right? So we have to remember that your core isn't for when you're laying on the ground and your legs or arms are moving. It's for when your feet are on the ground and your body is moving. So it's a little bit different way to think about it, because a lot of times what people look at is just getting up. Right? How many of you have that exercise that's like, man, it's all I can do to get my shoulders off the ground? Yeah, we all have those. And the question isn't, are your shoulders getting off the ground? It's, are you doing the right thing to get there? Okay? And the trainers here, you see all the patterns, right? You'll see all sorts of ways that people cheat just to get the job done. Which we're glad that you're trying, don't get me wrong. Now, here's the pelvis. I'm not a good artist, by the way. You've seen my stick figures. they're kind of a mess. But you have your hip bone here. All right. So that deep core, the hip flexor that we're mostly looking at, it's called your psoas muscle, and it attaches from here down, all the way through here, and it's kind of big. If you were a cow, that was terrible. Sorry. If you were a cow, this would be your filet mignon, because it has lots and lots of little fibers, because it's doing a ton of work to control how you're moving. So this muscle isn't about moving the hip. Its job is to control the spine, all right? Now, I have this talk with a lot of physical therapists and doctors, a lot of other people, and they look at me like, no, it's a hip flexor, because that's what we learned, right? But what we look at is this job, the job of this is actually to control the spine. So if I'm using this muscle to try to get my legs off the ground, all I'm really doing is pulling on the spine. And it kind of attaches from here down to the front. So if you imagine my shirt pulls me, what does that do? It kind of pulls my spine forward. Does anyone want this spine? That's not a perkier butt, by the way. That's just an arched back. But what do? We put on some high heels and we feel like our butt looks better. So what we want to look at is we're not trying to use your hip flexors. We're not trying to pull on the spine. We're trying to turn on all the rest of the right things. Any questions on that? I promise the anatomy will be over like super fast. Now, instead of depending on these large muscles for your core work, what do? Remember, they compress. What would you say instead, what if we turned on your internal corset muscles? How many of you like what you look like in a corset? Well, not many of us wear corsets anymore. Usually that question goes off better when I'm at the Medicare age group, because most of them remember having to wear a corset at some point. But what you do have is you have some muscles that come around. What color are we on? Let's go with blue. You have some muscles that still attach in here, but they actually come around and they compress in. All right? There's a lot of different ones here. We have some that come from the side. We have some that come up and down. We have some that come this way. All together, when they turn on, they draw your tummy in. Now, we tend to look at it in terms of, hey, I want my tummy to look flat here. I tend to look at this in terms of, are we taking care of your spine? Because your spine will do a lot better with a nice stable hug than it will with a big slam and shear. Does that sound like it'd probably be more comfortable? Anyone game for a slam and shear? I don't have too many people volunteer for that. All right, so when we look at these muscles, these are the main ones that you think about. You think about the hip flexors, you think about the obliques. You all have heard of the obliques, right? How many of you, actually in this group, I'll probably get more answers than I do anywhere else, but how many of you have heard that your pelvic floor is part of your core? Yeah. Were you the one telling me that y'all were talking about that here?
Yes.
About the pelvic floor with your abdominal stuff? So we look at the pelvic floor, pelvis. How many of you have seen a skeleton? You know what the pelvis part is? It's kind of like a bowl, all right? In the bottom of that bowl, you have muscles. They're kind of like a hammock, all right? This hammock holds up your bladder, your uterus, and your rectum. If a hammock is here, it can hold stuff in it. If my hammock is here, what's going to happen to all the stuff in the hammock? What happens if I'm here and I try to turn on my core muscles? I'm going to squish my bladder and I'm going to leak. So you don't have to raise your hand for this one, but some of you know what I'm talking about. How many of you have done a little jumping? It's like in one exercise, it's like, oh, that one's going to make me leak. I got to be careful on that one. Or, oh, but I'm okay with this one. That's going to have to do with your pelvic floor, your hips, and your core. Is anyone here, unless you invest in poise pads, and you want everyone using poise pads, which I hope we don't, is anyone here excited about not having good control of your bladder? Yeah. I don't get yes answers to those. So a lot of times we feel, and we don't talk about what happens in underwear. It's kind of we're Southern sweet girls, we don't talk about that. We tend to have this assumption that it's not something we talk about, and it's just something you have to deal with as you get older. So first of all, it's not. It is not. And these are things that we see in women, especially if you've had kids, or especially if you work at a desk job, or especially if you don't have good pelvic floor and core control. So when we look at this, if you think of my core from here to here like a Coke can, right? If you have a Coke can that's closed and you try to squish it, it's just solid, right? If I pop the top on it and then I squish it, what happens? Psh, we make a mess, right? So you've got to have, when you look at your core, we're not just looking at here, we're looking at the bottom, the pelvic floor part, and we're looking at the top, your diaphragm. Most people think your diaphragm is just for breathing. It also helps to stabilize your spine. So the cool thing there is, sorry, I wrote this down on a piece of paper. I'm trying to make sure I don't lose my place. All right, pelvic floor, diaphragm, the muscles around the front and the back. Two more to go over, but I'll give you the cool thing in a moment. Now, we tend to think of the core as just the stomach. How many of you work on core from the back too? Right? Guess what? Just like you have your six-pack muscles in the front that compress, you have some of your back muscles here that compress as well. So our job is not to just compress everything, we want to stabilize it. Now, do you remember how I talked about you have some of these muscles that kind of come at an angle? When you are getting baked in your mama's tummy, you have abdominal muscles that come all the way up to here. These are your abs. And then what happens is your ribs grow into them, right? Now, the reason that's important is because these little muscles in between your ribs, they're part of your core muscles, okay? That's why breathing is so important. So how many of you think that you'd love to, if you're doing a crunch or you're doing a core exercise, if you can time your breathing with it, you get double your effect for some of these nice oblique muscles. Your oblique muscles we don't call them obliques up here, but they're basically oblique. They're just continuations of obliques. They turn on the same time your obliques come on. So, any questions about all these different muscles going on? Is there anything I've missed that you're like, hey, I like to work on this one? No questions? That's all right, I'll entertain. Okay, now, when we're looking at all of these, so we know that these muscles extend all the way up into the ribs. We know your diaphragm actually attaches down into the spine to help stabilize your rib cage onto the spine. We know that the rib cage has to be stable for this to happen. If you feel your ribs doing funky things when you're working on core exercises, it's probably wrong. Your ribs aren't supposed to do this with core. Your core muscles are supposed to pull the ribs down and in. Do you see that direction I'm going into? It's keeping them down and in. If you feel like your ribs flare out or that your stomach pushes out when you're doing your core work, well, how many of you have heard practice makes perfect? Well, you only get perfect at what you're practicing. So if you're practicing it wrong, you're getting really good at doing it wrong. So if I'm practicing like where my stomach is pushing out as I'm getting stronger, guess what I'm doing? I'm compressing and I'm sticking my stomach out. I'm getting really strong with it out here. Does anyone come and work this hard to make your stomach stick out more? Question?
So when I do squats,
Uh-huh.
my gut comes out. Is that wrong? Should I be squeezing it in? And I can't.
So, stand up.
She says, and I can't.
By the way, guys, like I'm happy to answer any questions, and this is your time. Like I'm happy to go over. Come on up. Put your hands on your belly. When you squat, is it doing that?
Yep.
Tuck your bum.
That's my butt.
And now keep your bum tucked as you squat. Oh. Oh. So do you remember how we talked about that hammock? All right, so if my hammock, if the hammock is on a tilt, all right, can you all envision that my hammock, my pelvic floor is tilted this way? And I push down on it, I'm compressing all the guts, and things want to push down and forward and out and forward. But if I tuck, now things are resting down into the hammock, and I can work on these, and look, it's not pushing my belly out.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, and too hard, was it?
No.
Great job. Do you want to give it a try?
Everything was
Stand
that
up.
easy.
You have to know this is not a hold and still class. As soon, I know you all are thinking like, oh, I just am relaxing after that hard class. All right.
I can't, mommy.
So try, I want you just to feel the difference. Stick your tummy out and try squatting. You feel how your stomach's coming out versus tuck your bottom in. Now, I will tell you, for some people, this isn't going to work. I have a lot of people who are very strong like this, and getting that to tuck is hard. So here's the pubic bone. Here's my belly button. I want you to imagine you're zipping up your pants like you're zipping up towards the pubic bone. Does that make sense? So that little tucking under, hold that. Now try squatting and see if it feels different.
It's much harder. Oh my gosh, it's right out here.
You're having to actually use your butt, right? So think about how many squats do you do?
So many.
All the time. It's completely different if you've got your pelvis where it needs to be and your core is stabilizing. All right, now you want to try another fun one? How many of you have heard of a Kegel exercise? Oh, yeah.
Am I doing it right? Because I feel like it's so much fun. I know it's harder, but I want to make sure, am I doing it right?
How's it feel?
Hard.
It takes away the range of motion.
Yeah.
Well, because you have to control it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you truly have. So if I'm here, I can fold over and just put my belly on my thighs.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. But if I'm here, I truly have to use my legs to get down to it and my butt.
It doesn't feel like a leg exercise.
Yeah.
But it's almost like it's not as hard on the knees, but it's more up
Yep.
here.
It puts it on the muscles. Now, how many of you do this and you feel your knees come way forward?
Yeah.
Now, we did a knee talk, by the way, before. And what did we talk about a lot of? Your hips and your core is a big part of that. So if you notice that you can, if you're in a neutral pelvis, not a full on, like we're not trying to, we're not like, I always think of Kermit the Frog if he was walking without a stick. All we're looking to do is to get you to a slightly more neutral position. So if you feel like you can't do it at all, try just doing half a tuck versus a whole tuck. So it's just that, just to neutral. And a quick way to think about that is imagine if you're wearing a belt. Is your belt buckle level? All right, if the belt was on top of a bowl, would that bowl of water pour out or would it stay like up? Does that make sense? Keeping that belt where it's level from the front to the back instead of here. And what we tend to do is we tend to lock our knees, arch our back, and we feel like, oh, I'm stable. Well, that's because you're jammed out the farthest end of the joint that you can possibly go. And if that's where you tend to be, then you're going to start rubbing on that joint. This is where people come to me and they're like, oh, I've got bone-on-bone arthritis, which is not that big a deal, guys. You just have to take care of it, right? It does not mean you have to go get your bones chopped off and replaced, that sort of thing. So how do you all feel with that? Who's still tired from class and wants to sit back down? That's fine. Let's chill out and rest. All right, so where were we? All right, pelvic floor. So, how many of you all have heard of a Kegel before, I hope? Usually, I do teach this to men, and they kind of look at me like, okay? But men have muscles down there too. We tend to think about Kegel exercises, especially if you've had kids. How many of you have had an OBGYN say, do some squeezes like you're stopping from peeing? And that's what they told you Kegel was, right? And so what do you think? You imagine that, this is very TMI, but when when you think of a butthole, it's a sphincter, and it squeezes like this, right? Okay? Our other openings don't open and close this way, okay? They open and close a little bit differently, which makes you realize Kegel was invented by a man, right? So these openings, what I want you to think of, not trying to get a sphincter squeeze down there, because what you'll find yourself doing is this. How many of you have gotten off an airplane and you're like, I just have to get there? You squeeze your knees, right? A Kegel exercise is actually a pelvic floor lift. So if you think of that hammock, it has to lift up to hold everything where it's supposed to be, all right? How many of you know someone who's had one of those awful bladder sling surgeries?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, 3 to 5 years, and the doctor will consider it a success because they did better for almost, you don't want relief for 3 to 5 years. You want it fixed, right? That's the easiest thing to fix, by the way. It is not hard. It takes like 2 weeks of training, and then you work on it. If you know anyone who's considering having that, like, that's a super easy fix. Save yourself the trauma of getting cut open if you can. So the pelvic floor, it actually lifts. So it's not a squeeze this way. But what I want you to think about is if you sit, it's kind of hard to do sitting down in this position. You can lay down or you can stand up. You don't even have to do it right now. But I want you to imagine that you're sitting on a Kleenex, okay? And that you're going to pick that Kleenex up. A little different, isn't it? I can tell when people work on it because their eyebrows go up. Especially the men. For men, we teach them, and I teach this way to some women if they can't get the coordination, because it's not like you learn about how to use these muscles in PE class. If you're a man, we say suck up your nuts. It's a testicular lift because they're under there, and you pull up and in. And I tell you that so you can envision it's that under there coming up and in. Because the vaginal wall is not a squeeze this way. It's this. You're never going to be able to think of it the same way again, are you? It's not just an opening. You can close it, and you can, when you think about, have you heard of like elevator muscles? So what they say is squeeze and pull up. You're not weightlifting here. It's just that little drawn up and in. Feels a little different, doesn't it? Now, stand back up again. Now try doing the zip up the pelvis to get that little tilt, and then that Kegel draw in, and now try squatting. It's a lot different, and you'll notice because we're so ingrained that if you've got to pee, you squish your knees together. If your feet are apart, when you come down, you're kind of getting an opening through you'll notice as you squat down, it's harder to keep it because it's an opposite motion of what you're used to doing to try to hold your bladder. Does that make sense? By the way, pelvic floor is very important. It helps you keep the urine in, it helps you keep the poop in. If you can't use your pelvic floor well, you can't keep everything in that's supposed to. If you can't relax your pelvic floor, then you can't fully empty your bowels, bladder, or enjoy sex. Those are all important things, right? So kind of keep these in mind. When we're talking about core, you've got to have the pelvic floor with it. All right, now while we're standing, put your hands on your stomach. I want you to take a deep breath in. How many of you felt your stomach stick out when you did that? All right, it's a very common thing for people to talk about belly breathing. And I'm going to tell you that in some cases we'll use a version of that, but in general, you don't want your stomach to stick out. What we're looking for is your diaphragm to drop down. So now, I want you to put your hands kind of right up under the boobs on the ribs. Breathe in. Do you feel those ribs kind of come out? Now, you'll usually see this on older men where it's like they're kind of like their ribs just kind of stick out here. If you don't have good core control to keep the ribs down, your core is actually supposed to help anchor the ribs down so you can breathe. But we should expect that you're breathing enough to get these lower ribs to fully expand. You can actually put your hands and practice like, okay, I'm gonna fill up my right lower lungs. You can Jedi mind trick that stuff into where the air is going. We use this on people who are prone to things like pneumonia, so they can actually get that deep breathing into certain lobes of the lungs. But guess what? That's your core that helps do that. It's your muscles that help to draw things open and to squash them closed. So when you're breathing, try holding that little Kegel exercise we just talked about, that little lift up and in. Yes, I said suck up your nuts to a whole group of women. Try holding that and try breathing. Do you notice when you exhale, it's like you want to lose the pelvic floor hold? A little weird, isn't it? Right? Now, your pelvic floor actually helps with breathing too. It's going to move up and down as you breathe. But being able to hold that, yes, most people think, oh, your diaphragm makes you breathe. My pelvic, I don't breathe down there. But it helps to counterbalance the pressure of your diaphragm, actually. So when we look at this, how many of you are thinking there might be a little more involved in core than I originally thought? Yeah, right? All right, let's try something. Go ahead and lay down on your back with your knees bent like you're about to do a sit-up. All right, I want you to imagine you're doing that awful, awful thing that in or not this boot camp, but in like military boot camp, that they say is a sit-up. Try one. You know that one where you bring your elbows all the way up to your knees, one full sit-up. Okay, now how many of you did your feet leave the ground? All right. Now I want you to try something for me. Same thing. I want you to push your feet into the ground like you're squashing a bug. You're not killing said bug, you're just keeping it squashed. So push your feet flat onto the floor. Get your feet pressed into the floor. I want you to keep those feet pressed as you sit up and as you come back down. So keep the foot press, keep the foot press, keep the foot press, keep the foot press. Did you lose the foot press? Yeah, it's kind of hard, right? That's how you tell the difference. If your feet leave the ground, it means you're depending on your hip flexors to do the work and not your abs. All right? Now, for those of you who are still laying down, is your back flat on the ground or is it kind of arched up a little bit where your butt's on the ground and your bra strap's on the ground, but maybe your low back isn't? All right? So, one of the best things you can do to make your core workout, the ones that you're on your back, is you need to start with a flat back. Now, how many of you just went and pushed it down with your stomach muscles? Yeah, we have this idea that we're going to work harder. Well, we're going to start with working smarter so that you can, when you do your work, you're actually doing the correct work and get more out of it. So I want you to try this. Put your hands on your hips. I want you to lift your hips up in the air, and I want you to tuck your butt and put your back down, and then put your butt down second. And do you feel how that flattens your back out a little bit? What we're aiming for here, everyone knows what a butt looks like. You know where the butt crack is. You know where that little triangle flat part, the flat above the crack is? We're trying to get that down. So try that again. Can I have a volunteer? One fabulous person with the perfect crunch to come right on up here.
I don't have a perfect crunch.
You're going to. You're going to get a perfect crunch. So you might want to sit up if you want to see this part. Go ahead and lay down with your feet this way and your head that way. All right. So when you're down here, you feel how there's that little arch there? Now, try getting your back flat. Yeah, tuck and come down. All right, better, but there's still a little space there. So I want you to feel, if I were to give you a butt scoop, you're going to feel my hands on your hips. Here, here.
Oh, big difference.
Now, you feel how flat your back is now. So when we're doing this, I want you to try that again. Come up, lift your hips way up, tuck, put your back down, and then you're not going to land on the cheeks, you're landing on the flat of your butt. So it's like you're doing your self butt scoop to get the booty out of the way so that you're on this part, right in between the dimples. You're not on the booty part, you're right in here. Does that make sense? So now, push through your feet. Get your back, set yourself back flat again. Okay, so lift your bum, tuck, and come back down. All right, so you feel how your back is flat now. Now I want you to push your feet down to the ground just a little. We're not lifting your butt. Now try doing that little sit-up. It's a lot different, isn't it? All right, now, you did that perfectly for what we're going to talk about. Do the same thing, but I want you to feel your stomach and tell me, does your stomach push out?
When I do a sit-up, it pushes out.
Yeah. Now, do you remember how we talked about the Kegel exercise, that pull in, up and in from below? We're going to do what's called a Kegel and draw in. So, if you imagine you got your belly button and the pubic bone right in between there, if you shot an arrow through there and from the side, that spot where they intersect, I want you to imagine that's your pelvic center. So if we lift up from below and we draw your tummy in just a little, that's where, have you heard of lower abs? First of all, there's no such thing as lower abs. There's abs. Okay, you can try to help target this, but if you can get, a lot of people suck in their stomach like this, and it leaves this pooch out. But if you get the Kegel and the draw in, do you see how that starts to, it looks flatter. I still got all my fat there, but it's flatter fat. How's that for flatter fat? That's probably not a good thing. But if you do that pelvic floor lift and then draw in the stomach in towards this center right in there, give that a try. Hold that, and now try coming up into a crunch. Come back down. Now, hard.
I got a long way to go.
We all do. I mean, these are tough things to work on because we have this idea that we just push, push, push. Hard work is fantastic, and I know y'all are hard workers because I've seen what she does. Like, that's not a joke. But if you can add in some of these strategies, then all the hard work you're doing, if you're going to do the work, you may as well double and triple the benefit of what you're getting out of it. Does that make sense? Now, we're going to do one more thing with this. All right, so we got a lot going on here. Back flat. You push through your feet just a little bit. You got the Kegel draw in, Kegel and the draw in. Now, as you come up, I want you to exhale as you come up. Yeah, and you feel how you start losing things there. These are a lot of things to think about, but if you can get each of those parts in, and most people, they'll do great on the way up, and then they relax everything to fall down. You have to engage all of those same things the whole way up and the whole way down. All right, so when I say you can triple your benefit with the same amount of work, if you hold it the whole way up and the whole way down, that doubles it right there. You actually get more of a benefit on the way down than you do on the way up. If you can hold that Kegel draw in, that's where you get that ×3 instead of just ×2. Does that make sense? Great job. All right, so I'm going to write this up here so we all have
Nicole, I
this.
won't be able to do a sit-up for our next core day, just so you know.
Because she's doing it right.
Yes, my goal is to get
Okay.
5.
This is hard. So if you're laying on your back and if you get the back flat first, does anyone have questions about how to get the back flat? I'm not sure how much you can see here. By the way, again, I'm not perfect for it. But, so if I'm back, can you see how my back is arched right now?
Yeah.
I don't know how many of you can see over there. My back is arched and I try to push down. I'm really, what are my feet doing? I'm just pivoting a little bit. So what I do is I don't just core my way down because then all I'm doing is jamming the spine. I'm gonna lift, tuck, and I'm just gonna roll my back down until I land on the flat above the crack. So no longer on the cheeks, I'm on the back. And here I'm just resting on a flat back position. So I'm already gonna have an easier time of it. So I'm not having to go from here to push and then come up. I'm already halfway there. Now when I do this, I'm stabilizing my stomach here as opposed to here. You see the difference in my stomach pushing out versus my stomach coming in? It's a little different, isn't it? Can you give it a try? All right, so step by step. First, back flat. So remember to get your back flat, you're gonna lift your bum, tilt it, and come back down. All right, next, you're gonna press through your feet. More through your heel than your toes, but don't lift your toes up. You got your whole foot flat, so you've got a foot press. Now you have that Kegel and draw in. Are you all still breathing?
We didn't say that part.
By the way, keep breathing. All right, so you got the Kegel draw in. Now, I know it's a lot, but if you can get the hang of this, again, this isn't just, hey, core. We can do core, but you want a perfect core. This is a mic drop core, all right? So you got the Kegel draw in.
I feel like I'm like squeezing my butt.
Yeah.
Is that normal?
Right now you are a little bit. So you remember those hip flexors we talked about? All right, my bicep muscles, if I'm gonna turn on my biceps, I have to turn off my triceps, right? Because they're opposites. Well, if I push my feet into the ground, that turns on my booty a little bit, it turns on my hip extensors, which turns off the hip flexors. So if you keep your feet pressed into the ground, you can't cheat. You can, it takes a lot of training to cheat that well. And sometimes we see people who are really good, strong at cheating. So from this position, now put your hands on your thighs. All right, so just to recap, you got your back flat, pressing through your feet. You've got the Kegel draw in. And what you're gonna do is you're gonna slide your hands up your down your thighs towards your knees as you breathe out. And then you're gonna keep holding everything as you slide back down. And once you get back down, you'll breathe in.
Why do I have to do that on my back?
So what about like when we're doing that as a core, but then our neck?
We're gonna get there.
Okay.
But right now, we're just getting the hang of how to turn the right thing on.
So you're drawing that belly button in.
Not the belly button. All right, so pubic bone, belly button,
In the middle.
that center, your
Okay.
pelvic center. Because here's the thing. Do I want to draw in my belly button? Does this still stick out? Or do I want to draw the whole thing in? And if you drive that from your pelvic center as opposed to the belly button, now, we use that cue to help people draw in their stomach because everyone knows what the belly button is. If I said, draw in your pelvic center in the middle of all of us running around, like, what? What are you talking about there? You gotta, like, that's why you gotta take a little bit of time and get it right beforehand. Then you get the maximum benefit. You still get plenty of great benefit out of doing a core class. Don't get me wrong, you all know you get it. You feel it for the next 3 days afterwards. But again, our goal here is how can we take that up a level? How can we get the maximum out of every workout by doing it with these small changes? Does that make sense?
So that tightness is kind of like, if someone's gonna hit you, right? Like.
And I'll tell people that. I'll be like, imagine someone's about to punch you in the stomach. But a lot of times people do this.
Right.
And they like, and you see them turn red. You see guys do that a lot. Especially if they're a little older and they got a little keg going on instead of the 6-pack. Now, if you've ever had a child before, you know how when you're pregnant and it kind of pulls you out forward in front of you? So we have this saying called baby on board. Where I had a patient who named the pre-named, pre-sex to be determined baby, they named him Bob. Turned out to be a girl, but it was Bob. So we would say Bob in a basket. So if you imagine that pelvic floor out here, if you have a little more tummy, imagine you're putting it back into the hammock or back in the basket. So it's kind of resting in there instead of pulling you out here. So that's basically what we're doing. We're just putting our guts back in the bowl and then working on these. So let's try it again. All right, you're on your back. Start with the back flat. All right, you're gonna press through your feet. You got the Kegel and draw in. You're gonna slide your hands up your thighs, keeping the foot pressed, keeping the Kegel as you exhale, and keep the foot pressed as you slide back down. That's the hardest part for most people is to keep the foot pressed as you slide back down. How do you feel with that? Does it feel a little different than you're used to? Now, if all you get out of this is keeping your foot pressed into the ground, you're gonna do so much more for your core work there. Yes?
Okay, what changed sit-ups for me is I was always deeply tucking my chin.
Mm-hmm.
And so it feels different if you tuck your chin versus if you keep your neck neutral as you come up, like to look toward the
So what we
ceiling.
see a lot of people do is kind of what you just demonstrated, is they'll try to lift their chin. I want you to watch what my neck does. If I lift my chin up, do you see how actually I'm doing this to it? A lot of times I'll tell people, imagine you've got an orange or a grapefruit or a big apple, like right in here, and you're keeping that the whole time.
But you
Now-
also don't want to squash it like.
So actually we have some people that we will have them do that to turn on some of their deep stabilizers for our low back patients, but for most people, if you try to tuck your chin all the way, you're gonna end up lifting your knees, because it's not like here's your neck, here's your low back, it's one spine. You do something in one part, you're gonna activate some parts on the other as well. So if you can keep that in a neutral, so I got my back flat, do you feel how I want you to lay down and flatten your back and feel how that changes your head. Do you see how what your back does changes the neck position? So when I've got the back flat, as I'm coming up, I'm just imagining, a lot of times I'll imagine that my breastbone right here is being pulled by a string to this part. It's not about what my head is doing. think about where that top of your breastbone is coming. And so I imagine that this part of my breastbone is aiming a little target just above between my knees. Does that make sense? You had a question? Yes?
So the goal is not to lift your entire back off the floor, it's just maybe shoulder blades off the floor?
When you're looking at for a crunch, yeah. Because here's the thing. All right. Pubic bone is where they're attaching. Here's where it's starting. All that matters is point A comes closer to point B. This, if I'm coming up here, it's still the same distance, isn't it? I'm not getting that curl. And a lot of times people are like, oh, it's about the shoulders getting to the knees. No, my abs don't attach to my knees and shoulders. It attaches to my ribs and my pubic bone. So it's here, not here. You see how one of those is a hip bend and the other is a floor tuck?
So, this may be a dumb question, but I'm typically short-waisted compared to other women my height. And so I've always felt in the core very inflexible. So am I inflexible because I may be short-waisted, or is this achievable?
It is achievable. But here's the thing we have to look at. You don't compare your body to these tall ones. Like, we all have different bodies. And it's not about making body A look like body B. It's about making body A yesterday turning into what body A can be today. Does that make sense? So when we're looking at these, you may not have as much motion. It's you go with what you've got to get to neutral. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Now, if all we did was core in the front, without the breathing, without the pelvic floor, we're gonna get strong like this, and we'll actually kind of bulge out a little bit. How many of you have seen those guys at the gym? What are they? They're like, I can bench 250 pounds. And I'm like, what can you row? 60? Like, there's a little imbalance there, right? So just like with people who develop a lot of chest muscles, they get really strong in the front, and they don't have that back direction. If you keep tone in one side, you tend to fold over a little bit. You've got to get the rest of it too, and I know you all are incorporating that because I hear stories about, oh yeah, we did some of this, which is awesome. So right now, all we did was one sit-up. Is there more to core than doing like a crunch? And I don't recommend sit-ups. I usually say crunches, because if your back is on the floor and you're getting this, you're getting it. What's another great one for core? What's the very next thing you think of for your core?
Plank.
Exactly. Who wants to be my plank demonstrator? Who's very brave? We're going to turn you into a perfect plank.
I'll do it.
Come on up. So, here's the thing. Here's the ribs. Here's the pubic bone. Do you remember us doing a little zip up? We're going to zip this up, basically. So, come on down. And let's go this way, so everyone can see a little bit. All right, show us your plank. That actually looks pretty good. Now, what we talk about, I talk about a 5-star plank. So we're going to have the knees soft, just a little. Your bum tucked. Kegel draw in. And let's drop this down just halfway right there. All right? Because a lot of times people want to push their arms as far as they can possibly go. If you take your breastbone, drop it all the way up, and then drop it all the way down. Like there's down, and then here's up, all the way up, all the way up, all the way up. Right in here, a lot of times people try to push up as far as they can. It's not about being at the end of motion, it's about being neutral. So drop down just a little. All right, tuck down. Now, do you see how her back right here is, her butt's lower? This is fantastic. And if she holds the Kegel exercise with it, and if she keeps her chin tucked back, it's weird, it's butt. You've got knees, pelvis, Kegel exercise between the shoulder blades and the head. That's our 5-star planks. Feels a little different, doesn't it? To keep the tuck versus a lot of people are like this.
Yeah.
You see what I'm talking about? Versus here.
I've always tended to, sometimes I will try and I'll lock in like quads and stuff. And that'll make the back push down and I'll get lower back.
Yeah, you've got to be able to keep the tuck with it, but you can't tuck. Now try doing it with lock your knees all the way straight. If your knees are locked straight, she can't tuck the butt very well, but if she softens them just slightly, then she can get the butt tuck. So now she's getting quads, glutes, core. Drop this just a little, right here, not here. It's hard to drop just between the shoulder blades.
There you go.
And then she's got her chin. There we go. So she's like a straight line there. So everyone wants to think about straight lines. Beautiful, great job. Everyone wants to think about straight lines. And it's the small things that make the difference between I can be upright versus controlling everything. Plank is a beautiful thing. But if you've got any type of, if you have the kind of back pain where you can't sit too long, stand too long, walk too, like no matter what you do too long, it just kind of gets achy back there. Tighten up just a couple little things on your plank makes a huge difference. Yes?
So, when we're told to do plank, the shoulders, the arms are under the shoulders, mine are a little bit in front. When I try to put my arms like directly under my shoulders, it hurts. So is it okay?
It hurts where? In the shoulders or in the neck?
My back.
Oh, in your low back?
Yeah.
That's gonna have more to do with how much you're tucking.
Okay.
And a lot of times, when we have people doing that, if their back is here, it's almost like they're jamming this part, and then they're using core, so they're in a jammed position, and in there, remember what we talked about, your core, if you're using your abs for just top and bottom, and not getting those corset muscles in with the pelvic floor and the drawing in, which gets us our transversus abdominis, if you're not getting the corset muscles with it, then all you're doing is jamming into that position, and yeah, it'll start to hurt. So usually, first of all, if something hurts, it means you probably need to check your form, reset it, and try again. And I know that you all say that because people I treat come back and tell me, oh, they'll tell us, this hurts, we have to stop, reset. Or maybe that's not a good one for your body at that point in time, you gotta take a look at it. So for the most part, she'll tell you like, oh, let's reset your form. Or if you still have something and resetting the form doesn't take care of it, that's when you call your friendly physical therapist. Hi, I'm Elena from Marino Physiotherapy, and we're located right over off Cross Park Drive next to the post office on Cedar Bluff. Well, like a block down. It's pretty easy to get to. But yeah, if it's between your head and your hair and your toenails and it's not moving well, or doesn't feel right when you're moving it or exercising it or just getting your day-to-day life, that's when you give us a call. So, what other questions? Do you all want to give the perfect plank a try?
What plank do you recommend, low or high, or does it matter as long as
It doesn't matter. As long as you've got the 5 points, knee soft, pelvis tucked, Kegel draw in, and actually before you get in your plank position, I want you to feel your breastbone compared to your shoulders. You feel how you can sink or you can come out, but that neutral position is what we're shooting for. Because a lot of times people try to push all the way down here or they're hanging. You gotta have neutral between the shoulder blades as well as what's happening at the pelvis. So our 5 points, knee soft. Do the little pelvic zip like you're pulling the pubic bone towards your belly button. Kegel draw in. Your breastbone is between your shoulder blades, not way above or way below, and your head chin is tucked up towards the ceiling. So you might feel like, now there's a difference between your butt being in the air and you doing the tuck. So your butt should be lower than your bra strap.
You can't tap.
Okay, give it a try.
There's a reason all this hurts in the car.
Kind of tough. Now, I will tell you, this is a little different by body part, but try it. Most people, they get a little more out of this from the elbows because then they're not like on a full angle. They're a little bit flatter. Just because your arm length is a little different than your length of your foot. But it's harder on you to really get that tuck. And you'll see the difference if they're sticking the butt in the air versus getting the tuck. How many of you think that feels a little different? So key things. Pubic bone, zip towards the belly button. Kegel draw in. If you put that with any of your other exercises, guess what? If you could hold this while you're walking, then walking becomes a core exercise. How many of you would like it if just your regular walking did it for you and you didn't have to do all the so things to be thinking about. It's not just about what you're doing during class. These are things, I call them red light exercises. I'm sitting at a red light, what else am I doing? If you see me at a red light, you know what I'm doing. Any other questions or things that you have questions about for, yeah?
I have one, and this is back to those, like lateral diagonal muscles, but I know like when I do compound lifts and stuff, I feel like my abs and like stomach like broaden. I don't know. So like, is there or are there core workouts that kind of keep like those diagonal muscles strengthened for like that hourglass?
So, there's actually something, you all have seen a picture of like a person with muscles and no skin, right? Like just the drawing of here's where the muscles are. When you've got, have you ever heard of a rectus diastasis?
Yes. I think.
Usually, if you had a child before, okay. Sometimes if we gain weight quickly, and you'll see this on a lot of people, that little line in the middle. So if you think of these six-pack muscles, there's one side, there's the other side, now it's a six-pack. All right, so there's this like little white line right in the middle of it that's like some fascia. And if you're doing a lot of work for your obliques, but you're doing the large obliques and you're not getting the corset muscle action with it, it'll actually start to pull that apart. And if you look at bodybuilders, I really get a kick out of looking at bodybuilders because they're so cut, you can see exactly what they've been doing wrong. Because they'll get this little triangle right here, and they're proud of it. But it's because they're doing so much muscular development, they're actually ripping that part open right here. Okay, and then if they do a sit-up, they get a little bloop. Like, and you'll see a lot of people, especially if you've ever gone from my size back to your all size, you know, if you have any of that where you kind of stretch those tissues out, it kind of bulges out. You know what we call that? A hernia. Right? But when it's a big one, they don't really think, oh, that's just part of working out. It's still just, it's a lack of integrity of that whole corset, so to speak. So when we're doing these, if you think about that drawing in component with it, we actually have a lot of women who will get this, but it actually kind of looks like their muscles are kind of coming from the outside because this middle part is split. It kind of pulls out. So do you feel like it's making a split in the middle when you're doing it? Or do you just feel like the muscles are bulging out to the side?
Yeah, I just feel like they just like get bigger, like just different like body builds, but like mine, I feel like it was more like this than others. Like
instead of drawing in?
Yeah, but that's like the more like core and like strengthening I do, like it doesn't go more in, it goes like stretch.
Yeah, kind of the same thing we talked about from the front, where is it pushing out or is it drawing in?
Out, yeah, I push out a lot.
Yeah, that getting the pelvic floor and that drawing in first will help you to cinch the corset before you use it. If you don't have everything pulled in before you're doing your workouts, then you're actually just bulking up and kind of bulk out a bit with it. And that can be pretty frustrating because we're working out for things to trim up, right? Now, it also depends on what kind of oblique work you're doing. Y'all want to see some, I know we're done with the main part, but if y'all want to see some fun stuff you can be working on that'll be kind of challenging, would one of you care to grab a Swiss ball? And most of you have seen people doing exercises on, like, oh, I'm doing a sit-up on a crunch on the Swiss ball.
One of those, or you want
A full one. Like, how do you get those up and down? You just kind of
cage on.
Oh.
No.
Yeah. Woo. Okay. That was impressive. That was impressive.
It's much easier than a chair.
Yeah, with your rolling chair
That's
that
all
you
right,
like to
we'll
do
work
with.
with it.
With your rolling chair that you like to do with.
That's all right.
Scares me when I come to
That was awesome.
That's the perfect core.
That'll get you some. Now, when you're doing that, a lot of people will look at, are my legs lifting? Get some core with that. But think about if I can tuck and keep the draw in, so I'm getting everything with it, that'll help you do more core versus hip flexors. Does that make sense? All right, so, there. You were sitting on the X a moment ago. So if I'm looking at getting some of my obliques involved, have you all done pikes before? So if you think about where we just got through doing, all right, we've got the tuck and the neutral and the head draw. From here, I can bring this up and down. Now, when I'm on a bigger ball, my workout, I'll tend to tuck and I'll come up, but then if I wanna get some obliques into it, I'll bring the leg over. Okay, it's a small change.
Do not watch Nicole.
So the goal is not to flex just at the hips. A lot of times we're looking at the butt coming up. If you're keeping the tuck, you notice I'm not going very high. Does that make sense? That'll get a few things. How many of you have done ones where you've got the legs up in the air? Doing these types of things or rainbows? The key here isn't about what the ball is doing. It's about, am I drawing in and keeping my back flat? And I know that they talk to you about keep your back pinned flat to the ground. Exercising and talking in a mouth. So when you think about that, forget about how high the ball is going. Forget about how high your legs are going. And you'll hear, like, you have some people here who are super fit who can do these things and keep their back flat. But for some of us, you might have to bend the knees. You might have to stay lower and focus, back flat, drawn in. And I'm just right here for me to get this. I can't come up that high because then see how my stomach starts pushing up. It's about getting the right form for you, where you are now in your body type.
So when we do those types of things where like the legs are level, it pulls my back. Is it because my core isn't tucked like my?
Usually, and does anyone have like a towel or a sweatshirt?
I mean, I can take
Or
my
like
sweatshirt off.
or no, like something we can fold up.
I mean, you want my jacket?
Oh, there you go, there's your shirt.
Getting naked right now.
Come on up. So if you struggle with this, and I know you always hear that cheating is bad, but come on over. Guess what? Sometimes we can use cheating to help us. So I just rolled this into a little pad. Now, do you remember how we talked about butt cheek, here's the crack, here's the flat above the crack, here's the low back.
I'm almost trying to
Sound like a
finish.
Dr.
Butt
Seuss
cheek,
story.
here's the crack.
Sound like a Dr. Seuss.
Here's the crack.
We can work it in a box. We can work it with a box. All right, so if I put this, so here's the flat. If I put this on the crack so that there's room for the flat to go down, you can actually use this to tilt the pelvis for you. So lay on down. And if you've ever changed a diaper, you'll get what I'm doing with this. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to have you bend your knees up to your chest, all the way up, and we're gonna put this right there. Do you feel how now it's kind of putting you in a tilt for you? So you can use this to help you out. Because guess what? You can still work very hard with a helper. It's nothing against you. Because remember, it's not about you versus you. It's about you yesterday versus you tomorrow. And the difference between those two people is what you do today, right? So now give that a try. See if it feels a little different. You'll notice you can only go so far before this wants to start leaving the ground. So there's a point where she's lowering, where you'll see this start to, nice, right there. You go more than that, you feel how it start to leave the ground. So that's what your point is. And the hardest thing for all of us, go ahead and relax. I'll tell you, and this is hard for me too, but who do I want to compare myself to? The person who's leading the class, right? And it's hard not to. But we have to, and we want to take her advisement, but we also have to make sure we're, like, when she says you got to keep your back flat, it's not about getting the whole motion done, it's about those, she's telling you the important things there. Like, what's the important part here? That we're keeping the draw in, that we're keeping the back down. Sometimes that's not the most important. Sometimes we're doing a different exercise for the hip or whatever. You want one more for your core? Would you care to be my demo person? Roll on your side. Now. See? It's good to have something to do. Now, I talked to a lot of people about core and pelvis, and I talked to a lot of people about how the secret to so many things that we want is perkier butt. I know that sounds weird, but being stronger in your hips is going to take the pressure off of your back, your mid-back, your neck, your shoulders, less headaches, less issues with incontinence, fewer falls, less issues with osteoporosis, less hip pain, knee pain, ankle pain, less risk of fractures if you do have a fall, less risk of hospitalization. less risk of pneumonia and death in a hospital due to poor breathing issues or cardiovascular problems. Now, that sounds like a lot for one little thing. And your pants look better. Like, we're not just doing this for our pants to look better, but we look at the whole grand scheme of things. So I want you to notice something. If she lifts her, you have a golf ball in your mouth? Oh, okay. It was just like, that looks like I'm going to get for both of them. Okay, so I want you to try something for me. I want you all to watch right here, all right? I want you to lift your top leg for me, just up in the air. And you see how this moves? Right, relax for me. So when we think about motion of a hip, right here in the middle of the groin, that's my hip joint. This is the axis for my hip joint, not here. How many of you ever saw like Suzanne, well I'm a little older than a lot of you all, but Suzanne Summers doing her thing. And what is that? That's my waist. My leg doesn't move that far. That's how far my leg moves. So what do? We say, oh, I want to look like her at the front there. I can get my leg way up there. Now try this. I want you to tuck your bum, draw in your tummy, do that Kegel exercise. And now let's think about this staying still and the motion happening just to the leg. Now try lifting. You feel where I'm stopping you? That's all you've got for your hip joint. The rest of it going any higher is actually doing these Shakira moves. Okay, Shakira can pull it off. But for these purposes, keeping the core stable enables you to do any of these leg exercises. Try doing like 10 of those while we chat. But guess what happens?
She needs an evil apple.
You know what she's gonna feel?
I mean, that hurts already.
Yeah. It's called Burn Bootcamp for a reason. I'm
Burn
just
so
saying.
good.
It's a small thing.
Yeah.
Thank you, I'll be proud. So being able to keep a pelvis, when you're doing a hip exercise, the pelvis is your foundation. It's just the hip doing it, not the pelvis. That's why people end up working really hard and still having a flat butt. Right?
If we have on our minivans, we can't go very far, so.
But what?
If we have the minivans on, our legs when we're doing that, we can't go very far.
And that's why they're minibands, because you only need to go that far. And I want you to think about, put your hand on your hip like you're a mad mom. Everyone lay on your side and try it. Now, put your hand or more on the pelvis at your waist. So try bending up like you're sitting in a chair, and try lifting that leg up, but don't let your pelvis rock back or towards your side. Feels a little different, doesn't it? So put your hand at your waist like you're a mad mom. You shouldn't feel this, and you shouldn't feel this. And you might need to buddy up with someone. So I want you to feel the difference. If I take my hand on her pelvis, try it. You feel the difference where you can't let this move or that move. Now, if you don't feel that within 10, either you're one of the class instructors or you're doing more from the waist. May I help you? So give that a try again. And lift. So do you feel how your leg's coming out a little bit? Try lifting just there. You actually do a pretty nice job of keeping that pelvis still. And most of you will notice, if it looks like I'm trying to like mark a fire hydrant, okay, we're not doing the out. It's just that little lift. Does that feel a little different? If you're holding the Kegel draw in, if you're keeping your tummy drawn in towards your center. So if you're going to do the work, wouldn't you like to actually get the benefit? Yeah. All right, great job, everyone. Any other questions on anything? All right, well, like I said, I'll have some cards. If you have any questions on anything, the number on my card is also the phone number after hours. You can text, and it goes through to my cell phone. So if you're like, oh, I did this thing, and is this bad? Do I need to go to the emergency room? That's the one I get. Like, most people they're always scared to like send a message after hours. It's better to take care of things faster than to let them go for a week or so and just let them fester and get worse. So we do have a lot of people that'll shoot over a text message. And that's the one I get most often. I did something, do I need to go to the emergency room? Or what do I need to do to get started? But yeah, thank you so much for having me. Y'all have been fantastic.